Riot Games today announced their ruling on a connection that was discovered between G2, the team that just won its second LCS EU LCS split, and FNATIC, obviously famous five-time LCS champion, one of the most storied teams in League. A connection between the two organizations via Jens Hilgers. Now, Jens Hilgers is someone who, as a side topic, is on the supervisory board of ESL. Not that relevant to this story, but is also a co-owner of G2, a minority owner. And what happened was he made a loan to Sanpa, which is a FNATIC holdings company. And the loan was explained, as by him included, as being to fund their FNATIC gear project, which is where they made like keyboards, headsets, all the rest of it, mice. And due to it being a personal loan from him and not from G2 the org or company, it has attached to it a security clause where he would essentially take ownership of FNATIC, the organization, if for whatever reason FNATIC default on the loan. Now, all the sections of this are laid out there in the documents which Richard actually found. I'll link up here. Richard made a video about this topic. He's the one who brought it to light, and it's because of this that's now come to become part of the mainstream consciousness of League of Legends esports, and that Riot, in fact, have investigated it. So within the document that he found, there's a whole section where it explains that the security charge, and then it explains what would happen in the scenario when the security charge is enacted if the person can't pay, and that essentially they take power of attorney over the shares that they own, etc., and over the company. Now, here's what's interesting, is that in the world of League of Legends, because it's a key detail to note, ownership of two LCS teams is not allowed. Even if they're in different regions, you can't have an EU team and you can't have an NA team in LCS. Now, G2 and FNATIC are in the same league of LCS, same division. They're both in EU LCS. Now, what's interesting is when Riot investigated this, their punishment, ultimately, was to tell Jens Hilgers to reverse the loan, that's their words, and that they sort of warned FNATIC and Jens Hilgers, like, not to do this again, and that's basically it. They investigated, and crucially, they said that this deal was indirect financial interest. Now, here's what's going to be very key in this video. Listen to the language that Riot uses when they talk about all of the things that Jens Hilgers did and how they would affect FNATIC. Listen very carefully and try and think about what elements they downplay. What elements they tell you but then divert your attention away to something else, or some different way of describing what the implications would be and the consequences could be. Look where they place the emphasis on within the evidence, because it's going to be important how they frame this as to what the impact of this decision is, how consistent it is with past decisions they've made, what sort of precedent they are setting with this decision compared to past rulings and future rulings. This is going to be very important. So in the competitive ruling, they actually even did their own too long didn't read, TLDR, at the top. And I'll read that out for you, the first section. It says, recently, it has been brought to our attention that FNATIC and G2 Esports allegedly share financial ties and would therefore be in violation of the LCS team participation agreement. League officials have found that Jens Hilgers, a minority stakeholder in G2 Esports, has provided a loan to Sanpa Limited, parent company of FNATIC Limited, to support the FNATIC Gear Limited, which we classify as an indirect financial interest. Now, here's what's interesting. They then say, in this next section, the collateral terms of the loan grant Hilgers the right of claiming an equity stake of FNATIC Limited and FNATIC Gear Limited if Sanpa were to default on the loan, which presents the possibility of an undue establishment of control in the future. We have mandated that Hilgers retracts his loan from Sanpa Limited or divests his stake in G2 Esports. Both Hilgers and FNATIC have been formally warned for this transgression. So Riot mandated that Hilgers retracts the loan or divests his stake in G2. Hilgers and FNATIC are warned. That's ultimately what happens. So here's the key thing. There's then an explanation of the nature of the loan. So Riot and Hilgers, both essentially, you can find this whole thing in the documents, the competitive ruling and Hilgers' statement on the Esports Observer. And it wasn't the Esports Observer, which is a site that he actually owns to some degree, by the way. He made his own statement, though, about it. I forget actually where that was. But you can find the links for it, or maybe I'll put the links in the description box below, actually. And basically, I'll read a little bit about Riot's version. As security for this loan, Hilgers would have authority over the equity stakes of FNATIC Gear and FNATIC Gear Limited in the event that Sampa Limited were unable to pay back the loan. This is called a share charge, which essentially means that Hilgers gets first rights on aforementioned equity if Sampa defaults. They then put this part, it's very important. This does not mean that any kind of direct ownership or control was established by Hilgers over FNATIC in the past or present. And similarly, it does not create a future state, in which he would be guaranteed control of FNATIC. What it does establish is a situation where if Sampa were to become insolvent and consequently unable to pay back the loan, Hilgers would have priority over potential other creditors in claiming FNATIC's equity and ownership as a way to recoup the lost money from the loan. Despite the lack of connection between both G2 Esports and FNATIC directly, we determined that the loan agreement between Hilgers and FNATIC constitutes an indirect financial interest and is therefore not permissible. We further determined that the loan agreement was not set up with malicious intent to circumvent multiple team ownership provisions and does not present a scenario in which effective control over multiple teams has presently been exerted presently. Now, Hilgers essentially says the same thing and just mentions that he did it in that scenario to help them out with the FNATIC gear thing. Now, here's the key thing. FNATIC tries to claim that this doesn't allow effective control to be exerted over multiple teams. Yet, we know from this state of affairs that right now, regardless of ownership over FNATIC, through their holding company, Sampa, owe Jens Hilgers money. So while they owe him money, which, by the way, as a sidebar, technically the holding company is what owes him money, right? Anyone saying, well, in that case, it's just the holding company, it's not FNATIC. Yes, but the holding company operates FNATIC. Remember, if the holding company doesn't pay the money back, then he gets FNATIC. So that's just how business works. It's a level of abstraction. It's like if I hire a commentator like Monte Cristo or Moses in CSGO, I'm probably going to pay their company from which they will then get paid. I'm really hiring them though, aren't I? So don't take a level of abstraction and act like that means that it's not FNATIC, it's not Jens Hilgers, and it's in no way related to G2. So FNATIC owe Jens Hilgers. Now, here's the key thing to understand. Just having a loan between the two establishes and links the two, and more importantly, is an obvious potential form of leverage that Jens Hilgers now has over FNATIC through Sampa that limited their holding company. So, for example, even without getting FNATIC's organization, even without them defaulting on the loan, let's say they haven't paid the loan off yet, and Jens Hilgers, who owns a minor share in G2, wants to do a deal to get a player to G2, which obviously people were worried had happened in the Kickers case, but apparently according to Riot, that's not the case. And from what I saw, I think the dates were that it was before the loan anyway. But as an example, let's say there's another player that he wants to get to G2 from FNATIC. Well, that's immediately where he can exert control through influence, through leverage over two teams, because that's a key detail I want to make here. Because of what he can gain in G2, which is the whole concern about this, he can do things with FNATIC assets and FNATIC the company, which wouldn't be any sort of problem within the company. It wouldn't necessarily be about FNATIC having it to add value to G2. That's the point. So if a trade was to happen, he could ask for a specific trade, or he could say he wants to trade at a specific deal. And what could he exchange? Well, since he has leverage over them from the loan, he could, obviously in private, he'd have to do this. He could say, okay, you know what? I'll delay when you have to make the payment for that. I'll renegotiate the terms of our contract. I'll give you a marker so that you don't owe it right now. You can pay back later. This is a scenario. He could even reduce the amount of loan. I'll give you 10% off the loan if you let me have this player for this certain amount, or you let me have him now to this team. That's a massive issue. That's a massive conflict of interest, and that's an area in which, sure, he can't force FNATIC necessarily to make that thing. They can just pay off the loan, then they don't owe him anything. But he can certainly exert leverage, certainly exert some sort of kind of indirect control in a way which absolutely goes against the faith and spirit of them not wanting people to own multiple teams. And they're trying to claim here, this doesn't allow effective control, but it's very important the way that he can actually exert this leverage here. Now, Riot has tried to make it sound out like FNATIC/Sampa has to go bankrupt for Hilgers to benefit in some way. They really push the angle, or they try to frame it as if it sounds as, don't worry, like they basically have to go bankrupt. So here's the part in which they sort of say this, okay? They say the loan agreement between Hilgers and FNATIC creates a form of indirect financial interest between both parties, which is a violation of the LCS team participation agreement. However, the fact that the possibility of competitively relevant control is based on the financial collapse of Sampa as an organization, presents a scenario in which no current control nor future meaning control are established. Now, that's not true at all. FNATIC does not have to have a financial collapse and therefore not default on this loan. First of all, we don't know how much this loan's for. They haven't revealed that amount. All they have to do is default on the loan. The rest of the company can be doing okay. It just might not have enough liquidity. It might not have enough money in the bank to pay the loan back. They might still have assets. They might still have a running business. They might still have everything else going in their business, but they don't have the money. Right? They don't have the cash in the bank account to pay the loan off at the time the loan's supposed to be paid off. Presumably, the fact they've taken this loan means they needed money in some sense. They don't have masses of money sitting around. So when that happens, simply them defaulting on the loan, not the whole business going to shit and financially collapsing, when that happens, he will then get his equity stake, which in this scenario means he will control that stake of shares. And if that means it's enough shares, he either has a controlling interest, or maybe he just controls it outright. Maybe he owns FNATIC outright at that point in time. There's also the idea that even though he would be a minority owner in G2 in the other one, he's certainly an owner in both teams. How does that work? They're saying, like, well, yeah, but only they stress initially he's a minority stakeholder, and in this scenario, like, he'd own his equity stake. Okay, why are you making it as though the percentage of ownership is the thing to be considered by here? You're not allowed to own multiple teams. If you're allowed to own a small amount, you know what? I'll go and buy 1% of every single LCS team. Is that okay? Absolutely would not be allowed to do that. I'm pretty sure Riot would go mental if I did that. Would probably ban me, because that's what they do when it's people who aren't FNATIC and G2, etc. Now, here's a key detail to make. Something I'm going to address later, because it's so important, which is, in fact, actually, I'll just address it now. Fuck it, why not, right? Because remember, they kept stressing within that comment here. I'll find where it is. Actually, let's have a look here. So remember in that comment, it said the part about present and past. So here's the part here. It says, let's see. This does not mean that any kind of direct ownership or control was established by Hilgers over FNATIC in the past or present. And similarly, it does not create a future state wherein he would be guaranteed control of FNATIC. That's a key point. They keep stressing like past and present, and then they say, oh, in the future, it's also not certain that he would. Because obviously, in theory, they don't have to default on the loan, right? So in that scenario, it doesn't matter. But here's a key detail to make, which is when they had the Chris Badawi case, where they banned Monte Cristo and Chris Badawi, and Renegades had to sell, and TDK, etc. In that scenario, there was a part where they said, per LCS rules, any present or future right to ownership, right, as in right now, doesn't mean that you own the team. It means in the future you might own the team under certain circumstances happening, a contract coming into effect, something happening. Any present or future right to ownership is considered a firm ownership stake, you ready, regardless of the date of effect, which makes any such agreement reached with Badawi in this case, during the term of his suspension, to be a direct violation of league rules. So it doesn't matter if it's a possible outcome, if it's going to happen in the future, if it happens in certain circumstances. The fact it's possible, the fact it's anyway agreed, and in that scenario, they've never presented evidence that it's actually hard evidence that it's a contract or anything, could be verbal, could be anything. In that scenario, they placed that as meaning he basically owns the team now, in a sense, because they're just looking forwards in time, and that's firm ownership. He basically definitely owns the team. But now the way they treat this, suddenly they're playing with tenses. And it doesn't have to happen in that way. Well, how did Chris Badawi have to end up owning it? You had proof that under all circumstances he would definitely end up owning it, did you? Never even been suggested. That's not even what they are allowed to be the case. Now, in terms of the notion that because they have to default on the loan for him to get the control, that doesn't mean that he anyway exerts control right now. He doesn't necessarily have any leverage. I never even talk about that notably, even though it's obvious by the way I presented it there. What's great is a Reddit user actually made some very salient points on this. He even said this. He said, people buy bonds to exert control over companies extremely frequently. And I have seen many situations in my career where people have bought debt in the secondary markets in the explicit hope it will go into default. Also, if you want to see a prime example of how you can manipulate indirect control, look at the way Blackstone and GSO used Codair. And so, yeah, that's an interesting part there. And then later on, he says, here's a great example. Again, suggesting how it wouldn't matter necessarily if what would happen to the team if they went bankrupt, as to what he could then do with it, with his control, how that could help him elsewhere. Because remember, about owning G2 is a key point. So the Reddit user also says in a later comment, Or maybe he wants to take control of the FNATIC CSGO team and put it into G2. Who knows what he wants? Maybe he wants to take control of FNATIC and then we'll sell G2. The fact is that Riot are saying bullshit when they say they know that default was an undesired outcome. He's providing illiquid financing to a direct competitor not investing in treasury bonds. There could easily be an ulterior motive here. Now that's a key detail to make here, because the way Jens Hilgers could not only use his control, if he gets it, to benefit. I've showed how he could use control before he even gets FNATIC, before they default. But if they do default, here's another thing. People make out like, oh, because FNATIC could have to financially collapse. Not the case, by the way, just have to default on the loan. Imagine they default and maybe financially collapse. People were suggesting like, oh, in that case, what would dual ownership benefit anyway? He'd probably just have to immediately like sell the company and he'd just manage the deal, right, to try and recoup his losses. This is some of the problems with that concept, because they're not taking into account the fact that he has G2 already, something which he gained from FNATIC's assets already that they have. So firstly, for all we know, having FNATIC might be just the name and the company without any of the other aspects might already be worth more than the amount that he's made the deal for now. It might be the case that he could make more money just selling on the FNATIC name of the brand for massive name requisition throughout the history of esports for more money already. Secondly, FNATIC in different games has spots, has an LCS slot, has a slot in all the CSGO leagues. That's worth a lot of money now. Thirdly, since he has G2 already, to some degree, and is involved in G2, he can use their assets, players, or different aspects of the company, bring them over, different employees, bring them over to G2 immediately. G2's made better there. FNATIC, as a total organisation, aside from any financial issues they might be in now or in the future, is likely worth a lot more than his loan. Doesn't fucking matter if it wasn't intended that that would happen. If the certain circumstances were met, it would happen and he would gain this control over another team, and he already has partial ownership in another team. And again, it doesn't matter if it's full ownership, he has ownership in multiple teams, which is crucially what is not allowed within Riot's system. Now what's funny is in this scenario, oh, but that's only if it all went really badly. It's amazing how things that people claim, oh, I don't want that to happen, like almost like mistakes and unfortunate circumstances. In the world of business where people do shady business and dealings, these mistakes and things they really don't want to happen make them a lot of money and increase their wealth and their overall portfolio and give them massive amounts of access and power and assets and all sorts of things. Funny, when I make a mistake in life, when I do something that's unexpected that I didn't want to happen, does it make me more powerful, more rich, more able to have influence over the scene, able to increase the power, the wealth of my other assets? That doesn't happen when I make mistakes. You know why? Because that's like a very convenient way to pretend like you didn't want something to happen, which for all we know could be a direct thing that you're planning on. So you either get the money and the interest, presumably from the loan if that's the case, or you get an entire fucking org that's got a lot of value that they maybe can't get value out of right now because they don't know what they're doing business-wise. So, oh, as another detail to add, by the way, just as a side point, people keep saying like, yeah, but as Riot keep noting, and Jens Hilgers keep noting, but the deal actually isn't necessarily for FNATIC the org, it's for FNATIC Gear, it's for their FNATIC Gear project. Irrelevant. Since he's not given the money in some special sort of deal where they have to use it only for that, he's giving them money from himself. They are promising him, if they can't pay the money back, ownership percentage over the company. And ultimately, once they get the money, they can do whatever they want with it at that point in time. They can spend it on anything. That's the whole point. So as a result, that's not even a valid argument. They're just promising you that he's giving it for that reason, and they're going to spend it for that reason. Totally irrelevant, ultimately. He's essentially doing something which can give him an ownership stake at some point in time. Now, here's a really interesting part. Again, listen to the language of it. So in their punishment, they're ruling for these guys. What are they going to do? Whoa, it must be really big, right? What are they going to do for this? This is really dodgy, right? Remember, Jens Hilgers, like, head guy at ESL for a long time, involved with ESL, now involved with G2, now involved with FNATIC, done tons of deals, sold the CSGO team to FaZe, got obviously part of a fantastic team in ULCS doing this. He has enough money that he can loan FNATIC money when they need money. They're a massive org that's had a lot of success on all levels. So this guy didn't know about this and just accidentally, oh, sorry, I didn't really know it was like breaking the rules or anything. Pull the other one, mate. So here's what's interesting. What's your punishment for someone who essentially willingly has done this? And it would never have been found if it wasn't for Richard Lewis. If he didn't come out and reveal this, no, we wouldn't even know right now. This guy would actively be doing these things and potentially get ownership of FNATIC, and then we would have to have this scenario happen if it ever came public. Riot didn't find this out without Richard Lewis. No one found this out before Richard Lewis. So that's interesting in itself. That's not mentioned at any point here. So listen to the language of what their punishment is. So remember, Riot mandates reversal of the loan. Now, here's a question for you. What the fuck is a reversible loan? What is reversing a loan? How do you reverse a loan? I thought, you know what, maybe I'm ignorant about this term. I'm not a financial expert. I Googled it. I Googled a reverse loan. I Googled a reversible loan. I Googled reversal of a loan. You know what? Couldn't find any instances on the entire internet of such a term, or even that sort of terminology being used about a loan and this reversing feature, this other direction that a loan can go in. You know what I thought? You know what I found? Since there wasn't one, I thought, what would reversing a loan be? And when I thought about it, I thought, wait a minute, reversing a loan. So presumably what they mean is, since the way a loan goes forwards, right, is the guy who has the loan, who makes the loan, he gives you the money, he loans the money to you, you've borrowed the money from him, and then the terms of the contract say that you have to pay the money back, and then, don't know what the terms are, maybe there's interest, in which case you pay interest as well. Now in this scenario, reversing the loan presumably would mean you have to give him back the money that he gave you, right? Right. First of all, unless it means simply that the deal is going to be you paying him back without interest, which would be interesting in itself. Let's say there was no interest, then that is just a normal loan. He loaned money to you, you borrowed it, and then you paid him back the money that you'd borrowed from him and he'd loaned to you. That's just a loan, mate. That's not reversing. That is just a loan. That's actually the way a loan goes. It's not you don't put the money here and then reverse it. You put the money there, and that's the cycle of how a loan goes. Now, whether that means he doesn't get any interest, which isn't directly said, by the way, that might be an aspect where some way you're reversing because you're just giving the money back, but you don't have to pay the interest. But FNATIC's already had the money. Have they used the money? Is that money gone? We don't know anything about that. It's interesting that already they've introduced a term that doesn't exist. This is like some mad Orwellian use of language where they created a term to make it sound a certain way that it isn't and doesn't even make sense, and none of us can understand what that term means. I saw people in the thread who had no clue what this meant, who actually know about business and law. So, basically, a loan is demanded to be paid off. That's what reversing this loan means, right? With the money going back, so not a reversible loan, not reversing a loan, is essentially a loan being paid off. So, the natural order of a loan. It's just a loan, basically. So actually, they haven't punished them at all there. They've just said, essentially, in a purposely disingenuous Orwellian use of language, they're trying to imply something different is happening from what was going to happen anyway with the loan. But actually, the majority of what was happening with the loan anyway is still going to happen. It's just like this. This is the simple way to boil down what Riot's done here. They've allowed the loan to happen, even though that's what they're trying to say they're not doing now. They're going to take it all back. They've allowed the loan to happen. They're just simply demanding it be paid back now, rather than whenever it was going to be paid back. So the punishment, if you take that out of the equation, is just the warning. Or he doesn't make interest. That's it. If he doesn't control these organizations, G2 or FNATIC, because remember, he's only a minority in G2, not the majority. You know what, in FNATIC, he doesn't even own anything yet. In that scenario, if it's indirect, etc., why such a big deal? First of all, if it's indirect and etc., then, and it's unlikely, remember, they're implying that FNATIC would default, why is it not allowed? It's not going to happen, right? Super unlikely it's going to happen. Why is it not allowed? Why don't you wait until that eventuality happens, which is unlikely and not certain, and then if it happens, go, right, now you can't do it, certainly, because that would mean that you own the org, so please give the money back, actually, and divest yourself. Why don't they wait till then? It's weird, because remember, it's not guaranteed, so what are they punishing them for? That's what's weird. They're punishing them, but they haven't really done anything wrong, and it wasn't really that bad anyway. Also, why must they reverse it if he doesn't have direct control and he hasn't actually got any ownership yet, which isn't against the rules? Why do they have to reverse the deal? Why not just say, pay it off as you planned, in whatever fashion you were going to anyway, because at the moment you haven't violated the rules ultimately, and don't do it again. Why keep stressing this fact that, and emphasising the fact that it's so different and that it's not quite as bad as it seems and all these things that have to happen? That's the key thing about this whole case that's interesting, because obviously I'm going to tie this into the Renegades TDK case. So the language and the way this narrative is painted and told is very telling in this case compared to others. So FNATIC would only be owned by him, remember, if they completely failed. Don't worry, guys, it totally won't happen. Not true, by the way, if they just default on the loan. The rest of the company could be doing fine. They just, for whatever reason, don't pay, default on it, don't pay their loan, he then owns the percentage. So remember, listen, guys, FNATIC would only be owned by him if they totally failed. Totally won't happen, don't worry. And you know what? Because we're sort of reversing the loan, it's almost like the loan didn't even happen. It's sort of like, as he said, we can unwind the loan. We'll just take reverse time. You know what? Didn't do a crime now. Brilliant. Time cops. And you know what? Since nothing happened anyway, and we've warned them this time, so they know not to actually ever do something, because they haven't done anything yet, but if they were to do something, if time were to go forwards again, then since we've warned them, this is actually totally different to the Renegades TDK ban of Monty and Badawi, even though this has actual proof that they have done a deal which can lead to ownership and leads at least to influence and potential exerted control, and all the rest that can certainly happen are very apparent, and it's not even denied by the people involved. So even on that scenario, you've got all this proof, and the crime has happened, essentially, in Riot's version of a crime, in their world, why, in this world, is that not worse than the Renegades scenario? Also, by the way, if all this evidence, like in this scenario with these people, which Richard found, if this evidence exists, where's the journalist who got any sniff of that? Where's the journalist who has any information on that, who has any piece of detail, and why aren't they making a story? Think about how much they'd get it out there, how much it'd help their rep, which happens with all these other stories. All the other key details of these get out there when the really good journalist does it. Doesn't exist. Not even a sniff of it. I haven't even heard, from talking to a bunch of different investigative journalists, a single one suggests they've ever had any track record or been able to track down any piece of evidence that suggested ownership by Badawi of Renegades or TDK since his original ban. I've never found a single one who says that. Only Riot magically has this piece of evidence. We're just supposed to believe that Joseph Smith, definitely saw that tablet and transcribed it. Was it fake though? You didn't just make it up, did you? No, it was really there. It was gold. Can I see it, please? No, the angels took it away again after I transcribed it. That's the sort of ridiculous thing you're expected to believe. So Monty, by the way, made his topic about this whole thing about the evidence that they didn't have and what he did have and what he provided with them with. So here's the key thing. When we contrast the way this is framed and the way it was dealt with against the Renegades TDK ruling, Riot says, oh, they're different. They have a whole section with how it's different. And all they do in the section about how it's different is explain more about this case, and they don't actually explain the key areas in which each aspect is different to what happened in the Renegades TDK. They don't really address the Renegades TDK case, but here's the key thing. People keep getting confused about the Renegades TDK thing. The key detail of the whole case is actually the Badawi ownership of the orgs. That's what allowed them really the precedent to then ban these teams. If it had just been the whole side red herring, side circus thing, distraction of, the unsafe environment, and a whistleblower had to blow the whole lid off what was going on there, and there was potentially some shady stuff going on. You know what? People weren't getting paid on time. That whole thing is a side issue, which just makes it so that if you're already on the fence, if you're already did they do anything? I mean, I don't have any evidence, so I'm just going to have to decide based on whether I like them. Well, if I found out that's going on, then I definitely don't like these people. You know what? I'm glad they got banned. In fact, it was probably right. They probably did have evidence. Again, no shred of evidence. Innocent until proven guilty, not in any way proven guilty. So innocent, right? No. Proven guilty in the court of public opinion by the fucking mob. So the key detail here is the Badawi ownership was the smoking gun. That was the key detail that Riot has to then ban these people. Also, remember, they claimed not only that, but he had ownership in TDK, right? He wasn't allowed to have ownership in Renegades, but he was going to have in the future, which meant basically he has it now, according to their ruling, remember? Per LCS rules. He essentially has a firm ownership stake now. He also had ownership in TDK. Again, no evidence ever cited, as in talked about beyond, we have found our findings, or shown publicly or privately to Badawi or Monty or any investigative journalist that I know of. No evidence ever shown. There's a history, by the way, in esports, a long history of if anyone has any good evidence, they show it because then it's like a killer. It's like the smoking gun. The case closed, right? You're probably going to win overwhelmingly, even if it's just in public opinion. I mean, Riot has even used evidence and stats and cited stuff when they've banned people. In 93.8% of games he's reported for this, and look, here's a little sample segment of something someone said. Crazy levels of stuff. But in this scenario, not a single shred of evidence. Not a whiff of evidence. Weird that, isn't it? Even though the whole whistleblower thing wouldn't apply to the aspect of the actual ownership part, which is the key part. And remember, here's the key thing. Badawi was going to own FNATIC, own Renegades in the future, they claim, they allege. Jens, in the future, had a scenario set up where he could own FNATIC. On paper, absolutely set out with that being a real thing that could happen and would have definitely happened if certain conditions were fulfilled. Now, here's the thing. That means Badawi did similar things to Jens Hilgers, but first of all, less documented, less evidence that we know that exists. And he just did less overall. That wasn't even certain that would happen. Same in the Jens Hilgers one, right? They did less than Jens and FNATIC did now. Badawi wasn't even an owner yet. But they didn't cooperate with Monte Cristo, who was the current owner of Renegades, and who was the present owner and would have cooperated with them. But they cooperated with Jens Hilgers and talked to him and investigated it and talked to FNATIC and G2. They did all that and they allowed all that to happen. Yet with Monty, they just told him one day, we need to talk to you. And then he said, could I have my lawyer present? No, you can't. And then just banned him a couple of hours later. They didn't cooperate with him whatsoever. So here's the question. If it's okay for Jens Hilgers, them to go, listen, that's not allowed because you might be able to own FNATIC one day if that happens. And obviously you can't leverage them now, even though you obviously can. And have any influence over them, obviously can. Can't exert any control over them, certainly can. In this scenario, they said, you know what, just reverse your loan and it's fine. Well, here's the question. Why can't Badawi reverse his future deal with Monte Cristo that they claim exists? Well, I mean, I'll tell you the reason why he can't reverse it. It's never happened. There's nothing to reverse. Even they know it hasn't happened. If this evidence exists, hasn't come into effect yet. So Unlike this scenario, where the deal is in place and is already being processed, and now just one thing has to happen to make it click into effect and already happen. The loan's already happened. He has nothing to reverse. But in this scenario where you're allowed to reverse, why can't they just say, listen, we found out that you were actually planning to do that in the future, so reverse it, like, get rid of that contract, dissolve it, agree that it's annulled, don't own them in the future, and that's fine. Now, they're probably going to claim, well, we'd already warned him once. But that in itself is a problem, isn't it? Which we'll address in a second, by the way. So it hadn't even happened, no need to reverse it. And also, there was that statement, remember, where it said, it does not create a future state wherein he would be guaranteed control of FNATIC. Jens Hilgers, this is. Now, first of all, does Riot have proof that Badawi was guaranteed control over Renegades if he got an ownership percentage in the future? I mean, I don't know why that's relevant, right? It's also, for a similar scenario, not the way they dealt with Renegades. Now, in this scenario, they just gave them a warning. They didn't ban them. They didn't give them any actual punishment. They just warned them and said, give the money back for the deal, if that's indeed what reversing a loan means. Imagine if they'd actually banned FNATIC, like they did Renegades and TDK. So you get FNATIC, 5-time LCS champion organization, 6-time finalist, one of the most storied Western League of Legends teams of all time. Think of all the great times. A real pillar of EU LCS. You ban them. You can't even imagine it, can you? It's inconceivable. What an absolute travesty. And yet, you know what? A team who were in a similar position to them, an LCS team who had a slot and were in the league, were banned and just removed like this, without even as much evidence as this. Without a journalist putting some of it public so we can see some of it. Without any of these things going on. Without them cooperating with them and working with them and giving them these chances. And even talking to the current owner. Instead talking to someone in the future might own it one day. And say, well, you're a current owner in that sense and that sense. So we'll just only work with you and only talk to you. And even then not showing him evidence. They ban them outright. But they don't ban FNATIC. In fact, they don't even give them a real punishment. Now what's funny about this is, Riot is not famous for compassion or just giving little slaps on the wrist. Think of some of the things that have happened in the past. Because this will relate to why they'll probably say they didn't give any compassion to Badawi. So remember when Bjergsen was fined $2,000 for himself taking part in poaching, which is when he poached Lemon Dog's players to join NIP so that the NIP guys would release him to go over and join TSM. He was fined $2,000. Now, CLG was fined multiple times. So in 2014 December, they were fined for taking Skara from Dignitas. It was Hotshot GG and CLG was fined for that. 2015 December, very briefly afterwards, Doublelift and CLG were fined for taking Zion Spartan from Dignitas. Now here's a very interesting detail I want to point out here. Those people have committed those massive things that, that's quite bad, right? Getting fined a lot of money. But you know what? They committed a crime that Badawi never even committed, and he was banned for that crime, something that they were just fined for, and they actually committed the crime he was attempting to commit but didn't commit. So what the point here is, you do know, by the way, Badawi never poached a player. The definition of poaching a player in a sports context is this: to take or appropriate unfairly or illegally, example, poaching another firm's best employees. Now what Badawi did was tampering. Tampering is sort of attempting to do that, but not yet having done it. Tampering, definition, the practice, often illegal, of professional sports teams negotiating with athletes of other teams. The implication being of other teams because they're under contract. So he attempted, Badawi, to do what CLG did twice and what Bjergsen himself did. He attempted to do that. What they actually did, they just got fined for it. He got banned outright for it. Someone else, later on, attempts to have control over multiple orgs, has potential leverage and all the rest of it, just gets warned, gets told, reverse the loan, an impossible thing, an Orwellian term that doesn't exist. They've just created that out of thin air. Don't even mention they've created that out of thin air, by the way. And in this scenario, it's fine. So CLG did much worse, but Badawi got banned. And here's the last detail people will forget. Those guys, when they were banned, that was in the rules. You weren't allowed to do that. You weren't allowed to poach players. Badawi was banned for attempting to poach players, by their logic, when there was no rule for tampering. There was a rule for poaching, can't take players like that. There was no rule for tampering. They created a rule, retroactively applied it to Badawi, and then said, right, well, you've broken a rule. What rule? There wasn't a rule. No, I've just created a rule and you broke it in the past. Then banned him based on that. And then secondly, we're like, well, now it's your second offence. Any evidence of that? No, not going to show you any of that. You're banned for that as well. So Riot is famous for fines, for saying, like, we're going to make an example of this person, doing like the most extreme thing imaginable to a person, banning them outright. You have to sell your thing within 3 days. Sell this right now. Sell it in a week. FNATIC isn't even banned, isn't even fined. They're very harsh with how they deal with other people in certain scenarios who they don't like. I also want to point out at the end of this video, Riot did not in any way reference Richard Lewis, his investigation. They didn't even mention him by name. They didn't link to anything he did. They made it almost sound, if you read their thing, as though they uncovered all this, as though they were diligent and really were checking who's owning who, and they wanted to get to the bottom of it. Remember, if Richard Lewis doesn't bring this up, this all goes ahead, and none of this happens. Right now, Worlds happens with one of the teams going there, having the minority stakeholder, while the other guy potentially gets to inherit another team that's in LCS already. He'd have 2 teams. Riot wouldn't find out about this necessarily. They weren't doing any of the work on it. Don't even reference the person who did all the legwork. I mean, what's funny about this is they didn't reference Rich Lewis in the Riot Renegades case, and he was involved in that. He was involved with putting evidence forward in that. Shows how little they actually care about esports, how little they actually care about honestly explaining what they knew and what other people gave to them and helped them with. Instead, they presented every time as though, we, league officials, investigated. You did fuck all. Someone else told you what to do, gave you the evidence, then you acted on it. You don't even reference that. How dishonest and disingenuous Riot are. And you can see from this video, if you go back, all the ways that when they're talking about one side that they don't punish, they keep downplaying it. And even though each thing, you can just take away the downplaying. Well, they did break a rule, right? Yeah, totally. Is it about how much you own? Well, no, just ownership of any kind. Okay, relevant. How much then? Oh, but they can't control it. Again, is it about controlling? Is it about ownership? Oh, yeah, about ownership, sorry. They keep downplaying it and making it seem not that bad and all these contextual reasons. And then for the Renegades one, they're just like, even though we have no evidence, we don't have any proof of this that we're going to provide you, just believe me, that's the worst possible thing, and we can assume this here. You know what? Fuck benefit of the doubt. You know what? Innocent until guilty. Well, I think he's just guilty anyway. And they just ban him outright and give him the harshest possible punishment. The harshest possible punishment. Losing millions of dollars potentially in the future. In this other scenario, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, it's FNATIC. Don't worry about it, guys. Totally consistent ruling, right?